Right now, without doing anything, you are carrying a backup power system built to keep you alive for a week with zero food. Not a metaphor. An actual biological system, fully charged, sitting inside you at this exact moment. You've probably never had to use it. Your ancestors used it constantly. For most of human history, 5, 6, 7 days without a successful hunt wasn't a crisis story. It was a normal week. And the only reason you're here reading this is that your ancestors' bodies knew exactly what to do when the food didn't come. So here's the real question. Not did they survive? We know they did. The question is, what actually happens mechanically inside a human body when the food stops? The first thing to go isn't fat, it's sugar. Your body keeps a small emergency stash of glucose in your liver and muscles called glycogen. Think of it as the cash in your wallet, not your real savings account. Within about 24 hours of no food, that cash is gone. Most people assume this is where things get dangerous. It's not. It's just where the body switches strategy. And this switch has been mapped in extraordinary detail. Physician researcher George Cahill spent years in the 1960s and 70s tracking almost hour by hour what happens next. Once the glycogen runs out, the body starts breaking down stored fat, releasing it into the bloodstream as fatty acids. Here's the problem: your brain can't burn fat directly. It's picky. So the liver does something remarkable. It converts fat into a different fuel entirely, called ketones, that the brain can run on instead. You may have heard this word before: ketosis. It's marketed today as a diet trend. It is not a diet trend. It's a million-year-old emergency system, and your body still switches it on the moment it senses food isn't coming. Now, here's the part that should genuinely surprise you. By day 2 or 3, ketone levels are climbing, and something strange happens. The brutal, distracting hunger from day 1 starts to fade. Not because you're dying, because ketones appear to suppress appetite. Cahill's research suggests this wasn't an accident. It was selected for. A brain that stops screaming for food it can't get and instead stays sharp and functional is a brain far more likely to find the next meal instead of collapsing. So throw out the image you probably have in your head: a starving person growing weaker and more confused by the hour. For the first several days, in someone with normal fat reserves, that's not what happens. Days 2 through 5 are often marked by surprising mental clarity and real physical capability, because the brain has locked onto a stable fuel source instead of riding the sugar roller coaster it's used to. So where's the actual danger? Time. Fat is a finite tank. Ketosis buys you time by unlocking that tank, but how much time depends entirely on how much fat was in it to begin with. This is where body composition, something nobody in a famine gets to choose, quietly decided who made it through a bad stretch and who didn't. More stored fat meant more days bought. Once that fat reserve runs critically low, the body is forced into a much darker phase, breaking down muscle and organ tissue directly. That's where real deterioration starts. It's a completely different, far more dangerous process than the first several days. We actually have unsettling human data on where that line sits, though it comes from a study that had nothing to do with ancient humans. In the 1940s, physiologist Ansel Keys ran what's now called the Minnesota starvation experiment. Volunteers were placed under a severe extended calorie restriction, not for a week, but for months, partly to help plan for feeding famine survivors after World War II. What Keys documented was the endpoint your ancestors were racing against every single time a food shortage dragged on too long: collapsing muscle mass, failing energy, and a mind that became obsessively, inescapably fixated on food. That's the destination if the gap goes on too long. But a 5 to 7 day gap, brutal as it is, usually stays inside the window where the body is still running mostly on fat and ketones, not yet in the territory Keys documented. And that's exactly why feast and famine survival was possible at all. Your body isn't just built to tolerate short food gaps, it's built to bridge them, using stored fat as a deliberate buffer, buying just enough time to find the next meal before the real danger sets in. There's a bigger evolutionary story underneath all of this, and it changes how you should picture ancient life entirely. Food, for most of human history, didn't arrive in a steady drip. It came in bursts. A successful hunt meant days of surplus. Then a stretch of nothing while the group searched, traveled, or waited out bad weather. A body that only worked well with constant, steady meals would have been a catastrophic design failure in that world. So evolution built the opposite: efficient fat storage during the good stretches, a smooth switch to ketones during the bad ones, and a brain that stays sharp specifically when food is scarce. Because that's precisely when clear thinking mattered most. Tracking prey, remembering the location of water, not making a fatal mistake out of desperation. This also flips a common assumption. The picture of constant, grinding starvation isn't accurate for most populations across most of that history. Feast and famine cycling, not slow chronic deprivation, was the more common pattern. And a body built to survive sharp shortages by burning fat is a fundamentally different kind of machine than one built to expect scarcity forever. It's built for resilience during bad weeks, not built to assume every week is a bad week. And that brings this back to you, sitting here right now. The ability to switch fuel sources, to stay mentally sharp through days without food, to draw on stored fat like an actual emergency reserve instead of immediately shutting down. None of that is a skill your ancestors had to learn. It's wiring you were simply born with, inherited from an unbroken line of people who lived through exactly this over and over for a stretch of time that makes recorded history look like a rounding error. The machinery for surviving a bad week without food isn't some historical curiosity. It's running inside you right now, almost never asked to do its job, but fully loaded, exactly as it was the first time your ancestors needed it. The world around you changed. How often you use that system changed with it. The system itself never left.